Wow. I never thought I would ever have to sit here and make a video discussing about how much I hate my school. But you know what? We're in the middle of a pandemic, so I guess anything goes at this point. This video is just a response to all of the stuff the university is dealing with at the moment, and you guys have to do better for us as a student body and for staff. This goes on dealing with the handling of mental health and the suicide problem at our school, the collective bargaining agreement that you pretty much screwed the staff over, and the race relations at your own school. Quite frankly, these are really awful issues that we shouldn't even have to deal with at this point, and university itself has to take a long look at itself in the mirror and figure out what it has to do to rectify these issues. First off, let's start off with mental health. Look, it's no secret, unless you've been living under a rock, that uOttawa was and is still going through a mental health crisis. For someone in their first year university, and me myself having to deal with mental health this year, it was really shocking and really disheartening to hear that we had 5 suicides in the first 10 months into the 2019-20 school year. What was even worse to hear was that we didn't have the proper resources in place to even deal with these issues as they came along. The university telling us that they had adequate staff to deal with these mental health issues on campus is like saying that Donald Trump never lies when he speaks. It's just not true, and honestly, it's really insulting to all of us as a student body. We have 43,000 students who are not only aware that these resources are available, but quite frankly, even if there are, there's not enough of them. For the president of our university telling us that the university had just only hired 6 new mental health counselors after the death of their 6th student in March is like putting a band-aid over an open wound. You're not addressing the fundamental problems at hand, and you are just papering over the cracks. I remember last February when one of my close friends told me that she couldn't get in contact with a mental health professional from the school for over a week, and it left her feeling helpless and in an untenable situation. To my knowledge, by doing my own research, there's only been one town hall / meeting to discuss our mental health crisis at the school that the professor adequately said.
I wanted to correct this part and say that I meant to say president, student president.
And it is mostly the students forcing the agenda on the administration to push these issues and try and look for change. Something like mental health shouldn't be on the responsibility of the students. It should be at the forefront of the university's agenda because we are your biggest assets. We are the ones paying to use your services that we really can't use this year, pay tuition, and attend your classes here, and the lack of your care for the mental stability of your students is appalling and really sad. Shout out to organizations such as the U of O Collective for Mental Health because they've done an amazing job of mobilizing students and making sure the university is aware and they can't look away from these issues. And it shows that the anger and displeasure we have towards them. But I do have one more thing to say. I remember back in October when I was writing one of my first case studies of business, getting that first email from President Jacques Fremont, which was aptly titled, Statement from President Fremont on the Death of a Student. I remember asking myself, wait, what? How have we not been informed of this already? And why are we hearing about this now? I remember feeling a sense of some sort of empathy and sadness when reading this email, but at the same time, I couldn't really because it was so vague and lifeless, because I know this is a bit of a controversial take to make, but you couldn't even name the student at hand. Honestly, majority of us who read that email could not tell you who these students are who literally took their own lives. They didn't leave us any details about them, what they were trying to do, any accomplishments. Like, these are people. We want to put a name to a face and feel some sort of empathy and sadness along with their families. It felt so passive and like lifeless and almost that the school didn't even care. This is a person who had family and friends, and I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to give us some sort of context about who this person was, what they were doing, what their ambitions were, so we could put a name to a face that, quite frankly, is forever nameless. Also, why did you think it was okay, Mr. President, to copy and paste the same email that you sent in October and said virtually the same thing, not only in December, but for all the other student suicides that happened in the past 10 months. Like, the only thing you changed was that you took out Great Sadness and you took out the title. Show me that you have some level of concern for these students. Show me in your email that we feel some sort of sadness, that you're trying to change things for us. Instead, I was just kind of felt that the university didn't really care about the mental health of its students, because it just showed in their lack of response. Secondly, I feel like what's kind of pushed me to make this video having the two incidents that have occurred this weekend. And I think one of them, importantly for me, that I saw was the breakdown of the CBA agreement between the university and its own staff. When I first got the email on Saturday around 2 p.m. about a potential labor disruption, I won't lie, I was pretty surprised and obviously intrigued, because what happened? And then, for some odd reason, I got even more vexed that you told us it took you 19 months to come up with a CBA agreement for all benefits and staff that they couldn't agree on. 19 months! 19 months for a CBA! That's almost 2 years. Like, professional sports leagues do this in less time with much less detrimental circumstances, unlike you guys. And now the union have announced they'll go on strike by the end of, well, tonight if they can't come to an agreement. At first I was like, well, this is great. Now when Brightspace goes down, the IT people won't be there to fix it. Whoop-de-doo. But then I got curious. Why did the staff feel that the situation was so untenable that they had to go on strike for their CBA? So I did a bit of research. Apparently, the union and the school couldn't agree on a number of issues, such as unfilled vacancies for any staff, hiring of more academic advisors, and get this is the big one, you're going to enjoy this one, mental health counselors. Can't believe this. In addition, the CBA proposed to staff was aligned with Bill 124, which is fair, but also, let's read it out and remind ourselves that we are in the middle of a pandemic, and honestly, some people are struggling right now. The bill allows and says that it can restrict any sort of compensation increases, and that was fair by the school to do that. The one thing the school did that I couldn't really stand on was that they cut compensation and employee benefits by 1% for a 3-year period for unionized and non-unionized workers. Last time I checked, and I read the bill myself, the bill allows for any companies or workplaces that they can halt salary increases, but they did not state that you could cut your employees' health benefits in the middle of uncertain times, honestly. I felt really bad for them, because honestly this pandemic has affected people in a lot of positive and negative ways, to be honest. And, you know, the staff not even having some sort of, employee benefits, having some sort of compensation is really disheartening to hear. The PSOU and SOOU is the union for workers, and it represents about 1,300 of the employees at the university, and it includes people such as our academic advisors, any type of coordinators, and mental health counselors and specialists. For us as students, this potential strike will affect our OSAP requests and how long they take to process, TAs that handle exam and timetable changes, and our placements for co-op. In addition, the university wanted to cut the retirement allowance of their staff, parental top leave, which is how much bonuses women are allowed to have on maternity leave, and the reimbursement of their medications from 100 to 80%. No wonder this took 19 months. For goodness sakes, if I got these measurements from my employer, I'd be pissed off at them too. The student union at uOttawa stood with the PSOU/SOU's decision to go on strike, and personally I do too. In fact, I think as a student body we should all be insulted that our staff and our admin are being treated this poorly, and the lack of representation that the staff are getting is quite shocking. Whew. And finally, really, really fun stuff. Race relations. To think that you guys didn't have enough to deal with on your plate, now we have to talk about the ugly history of race relations at our school. Obviously, We know the history of the carding incident of how a uOttawa student got arrested for, get this, trespassing on his own campus. It also persisted this year with students using racial slurs during a breakout room and a teacher pretty much thinking it was okay to use the N-word during a lecture, which, I mean, seriously, how could you be more tone deaf at this time? Look at the current climate we're in. But then I woke up to a tweet on Sunday morning that kind of took me out of my ways and definitely left me with a feeling of disgust. I didn't think I would have to give adults a history on how not to trigger people of color in their classrooms, but hey, this is uOttawa, and at this point, I won't be surprised if I have to do this again. So, this letter / petition that was created and signed by a bunch of the profs at uOttawa said that it's okay for professors to use the N-word during their lectures, and they listed their following arguments. Mind you, my French is really limited, so I got the help of some of my friends to help me translate some of their points, and I wanted to debunk them and kind of explain why they're really ill-mannered and why they don't make a lot of sense. One of the main points that this letter stated was that stopping people from saying the N-word is reducing academic freedom and integrity because it is important for people to learn things that are controversial in history. Honestly, this argument confused me so much. I can guarantee you don't need your professor or a student, of a matter of fact, to blurt out the N-word in the middle of your class to know that it is controversial. You'll be able to tell by looking at everybody in that lecture hall because you know and I know that using a word that has been used to degrade a bunch of people in a group of people for 400 years will most likely leave everybody feeling awkward and uncomfortable with a sour taste in their mouth. Also, the teachers also stated that the whole purpose of the classroom is to reflect on subjects, to discuss them, and to debate on them, whatever they may about. Now, for a certain degree, I obviously agree with this statement. At some points, that's what the classroom is made for. But there are also certain things you don't need to debate about because you inherently know the correct answer to them. And it's pretty ignorant when talking about race to mention something like this. You can make the argument that residential schools don't need to be debated because they're inherently a bad thing. They disadvantaged a group of people and made them hate their own culture. They were subject to abuse, and the repercussions they're facing are still to this day. The relationship with the Canadian government is severed probably for the rest of time. In addition, you don't need to argue about the Holocaust in the middle of your class because it was a freaking genocide. You don't need to debate that it was a good or a bad thing because the answer is pretty much right in front of you. The use of the N-word inside a classroom doesn't really need to be debated because the word itself has so many negative connotations by whoever it's used by. And it doesn't really need to be used in a public setting amongst your peers. I really don't need to experience the same feeling I had in high school where everyone would stare at me for talking about something relating to race. It was uncomfortable, and it still is uncomfortable to this day, and quite frankly, it doesn't foster a positive learning environment. Another one of their arguments was that it would be a harder task on them to explain why the use of the N-word and the meaning of the N-word is bad if they can't say the full thing. Hey, look, I have a really crazy, it's a really bright idea. Just say N-word. That's it. Just say N-word. You do not need to go the full extra mile and use the word because you're already asking people who are already uncomfortable using that word to ask them to say it and not only be okay with it, but they may not understand the meaning behind it. So yeah, you don't really need to use the N-word to explain why it's a bad thing to use. Lastly, they believe the N-word is not inherently racist because it is on the title of important books. Quite frankly, this argument itself is debunked. Like, I just want to laugh at the sheer audacity and ignorance of this statement. President Fremont, I suggest you stop this petition immediately because I can only see one thing going for it if it is allowed to pass, and it's not looking too great. Honestly, I think this has pushed everybody over the edge. uOttawa, you've eroded already the trust of your students and your faculty, and quite frankly. You guys have to do a lot better because, like I said, we are your greatest assets. And if you don't treat us as such, we're not afraid to push back.